Hi.
Hi. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm trying to figure out how do you get up here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the gates are open. Hi, I'm Sean with the Sacramento History Museum, and welcome to another Facebook Live. This is Find Out More Friday. That is Printer's Apprentice and social media maven Jared behind the camera. It's October, and we've been talking about Halloween. We have been to the cemetery twice, talking about Victorian symbols of death and rejuvenation, and talking about spooky stories at the cemetery. We've talked about one really scary dude who terrorized Sacramento in the 19th century. And so we're 2 days away from Halloween, so let's talk about Halloween's history in Sacramento. It's safe to say that Halloween 150 years ago was a lot different than today, but how much different? So let's put it in context. Let's talk about Halloween today. And the Halloween I perceive it today is costumes capturing the zeitgeist of politics and entertainment. Not a few front yards that are heavily decorated, some of them for more than a month with the latest trends and technology. Things for adults to do like pub crawls and haunted houses, things for families to do. Our museum has the ghost tours, which are on hiatus this year, but we also have the Old Sac Paranormal Investigations. The State Railroad Museum Foundation has a costume-themed train rides for Halloween. There's all kinds of things to do. What there is not a lot of is nighttime trick-or-treating. The thing that I think most people think of when they think of Halloween. And your perceptions might differ. If that's so, chime in, let us know. But there's lots of opportunities for kids to be in costume, and Halloween's for kids generally. And they go, Sacramento distributes candy. There's lots of trunk or treat daytime ways to go into parking lots and get candy from people's trunks in organized ways. But not a heck of a lot of just the door-to-door nighttime trick-or-treating. Now, if we 50 years, in my day, it was trick-or-treating was the main event, and we were roaming the streets at night with kids from the neighborhood, no parents, just doing the trick-or-treat, just the basic thing. Now today, there's lots of very intense horror movies that people can watch. I am not one of them because I was a wimp as a kid, and now I'm just an old wimp. Back in the day, George Romero was just starting his horror movies, Night of the Living Dead type of movies. Occasionally there would be a house that would have a black-lit haunted house in the garage. I was not going in there. Now, even when my kids were young, they were still doing trick-or-treating. That was the main thing. But cultural attitudes seemed to change. There was no way we were going to let them roam the neighborhood without us going along with them. And the trunk-or-treats were starting to happen. Schools were starting to cool on the idea of letting kids wear costumes to school and kind of shying away from the whole Halloween concept. So even in my lifetime is what I'm saying, Halloween has changed, but it was really different back in the early history. And so the history I'm going to talk about is mostly through the perspective of the Sacramento Daily Union, one of the major newspapers that became the Sacramento Union, published for 143 years in the city. The first reference to Halloween about the city came in 1871. Tonight will be the time-honored festival of Halloween. That was it, one line in 1871. That was the first reference to Halloween in Sacramento. Now, granted, in 1860, there was a reference to Halloween in general. but it was in the context of a notorious divorce case, some aristocrats and adultery thrown in. It made national headlines, and it referred to Halloween as that feast day of Scotchmen. And so next in the Sacramento Union, after that 1870 run reference, are promotions and then subsequent stories about Halloween celebrations put on by the Robert Burns Society and by the Caledonia Club. Now both of those are Scottish, clubs of Scottish origin. Caledonia is a Latin word for the region of the Isle, British Isle, the northern region, which became Scotland. And so they were putting on Halloween celebrations. And that makes sense because Halloween is of Celtic origin. The first early Halloween, or what Halloween originated from, was a Celtic time called Samhain. It was a time in which summer was ending, the last harvests were done, and now cold hard reality was closing in, and there was a gap between those two periods of unreality in which spirits could rise from the earth and you could visit your ancestors, which makes it very similar to the Mexican tradition of El Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. And so many of the traditions that we know about Halloween come specifically from Scotland. In fact, the word Halloween is a Scottish word. It means Hallow Evening, or the evening before All Hallows Day or All Saints Day, which is November 1st, which the Christian churches adopted. And so the evening before was also a holy time. It's the reason that Martin Luther supposedly posted his 95 Theses on the church in Wittenberg, Germany, to declare the Protestant Reformation, because he knew people were going to be at the church on Hallow Mass. The first spelling of Halloween in the 1500s was Halhalon. In the 19th century, and through much of the spellings in the Sacramento Union, it was Halloween with an apostrophe between the two E's to cut out the V. So Halloween, that's a Scottish word. And many of these things that we know about Halloween are Scottish. Costumes came from Guising or Galatian, in which people would put coal on their face and dress in sackcloth and hide among the spirits. We're on the waterfront, and a lot of waterfront activities going on here, by the way. They would hide among the spirits and go to houses, and the tradition was that these people would protect the household from the bad spirits and be giving an offering of soul cakes, and the children would offer a dance or a song or a poem. And that's kind of where trick or treat came from. The apple bobbing, which is we all associate with Halloween, although in truth I've never seen it done, came from Scotland too. Is known as apple ducking or apple dipping. And the Robert Burns Society and the Caledonia Club also played a game called Snapdragon, which I can't imagine being reproduced now. It involved pouring raisins into a shallow dish, soaking those raisins in brandy, and then setting the raisins on fire. And the trick was to reach into the flames, the blue flames, and pull out a raisin and eat it. And there was a chant that went with it. With his blue and lapping tongue was one of the stanzas. You very well may be stung, snip, snap, dragon. I just can't imagine that being played today. So the coverage by the Sacramento Daily Union about Halloween took on three forms. Predominantly the coverage was society pages, stories about Halloween parties. And here I get reminded of how small a town the big city of Sacramento really was, and the prevalence of society notices. This Mrs. So-and-so is having a party, or had a party at her house with the full address, and all of these people came, and a good time was had by all. That was constant in the pages of the Union in the late 19th century, early 20th century. For a while, the Union had a student page, a school version of the Union that was inserted into the Union, and they just did the same thing. This Sally so-and-so had a party and all her friends came. I suppose social media is taking up the slack on that because we don't really see a lot of society notices in the paper. The second is advertising, just general advertising about Halloween accessories. The advertising club here in Sacramento during the Roaring '20s would put on an ad mask, MASQUE. I'm guessing that's short for masquerade, at the agricultural park, and that was a big blowout every Halloween, kind of a party. And then the third coverage was unrecognizable to our current Halloween. And I think the closest description would be to call it mischief night. It's still done in some parts of the country and North America. It usually takes place on October 30th, the night before Halloween. And that's probably why one of the early references to Halloween in the Union was in 1915. And the story was published on Halloween Day, reporting about events the night before, and there was a lot of pranks, a lot of greasing of our streetcar tracks, because we used to have streetcars in the city, soaping of windows, taking people's potted plants and throwing them out on the street, throwing rocks through windows. Another name for mischief night in other parts of the country was gate night. That's the reason I was walking through gates back there. I wasn't just randomly walking through. And that would be an appropriate name for how they celebrated Halloween in Sacramento, because there was a lot of kids detaching, unhinging people's side gates or farm gates, lugging them to the next street over, and then suspending them by rope from telephone poles or tall tree branches. That was a thing. This night is also called Cabbage Night in some places. In the Great Lakes region, it's called Devil's Night. In fact, in Detroit about 15 years ago, Devil's Night became so out of hand with vandalism and crimes that the citizens formed their own patrols to kind of allay that damage and tried to rebrand Devil's Night as Angel's Night. In 1909 is the first reference to this kind of mischief. They never called it Mischief Night, but there was a few boys who stole a gate, just happened to be a police officer's gate, and these boys were sentenced to a year in jail for this prank. Their sentences were suspended. And on that same evening, a 12-year-old girl with a number of her friends were all dressed up in sheets, were roaming downtown and throwing bags of flour at unsuspecting pedestrians. And one of them happened upon a couple and threw flour at the woman's red coat. And the man turned around and punched the 12-year-old girl and knocked her unconscious. So yeah, it was a lot of fun in 1909. In 1911, the Union kind of took a lighthearted, devil-may-care approach to these festivities and said essentially boys will be boys. The police are probably not cracking down on this because they remember as boys they did the same thing, so no problem. 1912 was kind of the same way. 1913, very similar too, although in 1913 there was a Southern Pacific switchman who was found guilty for beating his wife. He admitted that he was jealous because his wife was, quote, taking Halloween excursions wearing trousers. In 1914, there was a group called the Black Handers who threatened to blow up a local car dealer's home if he didn't meet them and deliver $10,000. Police never found the culprits, but based on the childish scrawl, police were fairly sure it was just a bunch of kids making mischief. Now the tone changed quite a bit in 1915. The police chief put out an order the day before Halloween saying essentially nobody is immune. If we catch anybody committing acts of vandalism, they will be arrested. I'm not sure if it backfired, but I do know in 1915 that was the most extensive coverage of the Halloween pranks. And in 1916 and 1917, they are still taking that same tone. They sort of relented in 1919 and still went back to the boys will be boys. In 1922, the Halloween reference took on a political tone. Halloween always preceded some election or another. This is the first time in 1922 that the Union tied it to an editorial and said that the real spooks in California were the misstatements, misrepresentations, and power grabbing of the legislature. So that, and then beside that was an editorial cartoon supporting a gubernatorial candidate named Friend Richardson, who is shown as a lumberjack having chopped down a tree, and now he was chipping away graft and corruption from the bark of the tree. Friend Richardson was that year elected governor of California. And that's kind of the end of the coverage. Now, that hand-wringing about Halloween, the public worrying was already starting to work its way in the newspaper. The Union has published several articles, not locally, but from syndicates, about what has become of our children, how dare they do this to society and Halloween. And so there was really a movement afoot to tamp down this celebration of Halloween. This was a movement supported by government who seemed to be afraid for the children of America, or maybe you could say they were afraid of the children of America. And American industry saw it as an opportunity with the shifting cultural attitudes to make some money, sell people stuff. And so there was an attempt to abolish Halloween, several attempts to abolish Halloween entirely. In Chicago during World War II, some officials wanted to change it to Conservation Day. Not quite sure how that was going to work, but the idea never flew. The people who were in charge of changing this decided not to do anything about it. The Youth Honor Day was the proposal of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, for some reason, got involved and wanted to change Halloween to Youth Honor Day. And that proposal was scuttled again by war, and this time the Korean conflict. Some of you might be familiar with UNICEF. That was proposed that Halloween be changed to UNICEF Day, and I remember being asked to walk around with a cup to get coins for UNICEF. I will confess that as a child I was very greedy and wanton, and the idea of handing out cups for coins just was not appealing, because of course we all wanted to get the candy. And so the real social influencers of the day, the magazines, the home and hearth style magazines, were really working up a froth to remake Halloween and turn it into what we know now as going around houses saying trick or treat, which is, when you think of it, as really kind of a meaningless holiday time hello, trick or treat. I remember as a kid I went to some doors and some older people answered the door, and when we said trick or treat, they said they wanted a trick, and we had no idea what that meant. But now trick or treat is just what you say, and the magazines were really pushing that this would tame America's youth and help them practice their social skills of saying please and thank you. Even Disney got into the act with a cartoon that showed Donald harassing his nephews, but then in the end it turned out it would just be a lot better, rather than pulling pranks on the nephews, to give them candy. And so food companies started getting into the candy business, and the rest is history, because it's really not hard to get the candy. I think it's I heard it was a $6 or $7 billion industry each Halloween, just in selling Halloween stuff. So that brings us today. I kind of miss trick-or-treating. Where I grew up was alongside the woods, and I really had that feeling that they describe in the ancient days of Samhain, where it just felt like there was change in the air and anything could happen. I would not miss those pranks at all. So, but I kind of miss that trick or treat is changing, but there's no problem getting any candy. Thanks for listening. Happy Halloween. I hope it's safe for you. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have encouraged people to go out trick-or-treating as long as they stay outside. So we'll see what history will tell what COVID will do to Halloween in the long run. Next month and December, we are going to go about neighborhoods and tell you a little bit about history of certain neighborhoods in Sacramento. So thanks very much.